"Any food left?" they whispered. What he saw in their eyes left him trembling. Ethan Carter had always believed that Earth would recover. He had imagined a future where humanity would rebuild after the alien invasion, where cities would rise from the ashes and the scars of war would fade with time. But as the years dragged on and the war's remnants lay scattered across the ruined world, Ethan's hope had slowly been eaten away, much like the land around him. The once vibrant cities were now nothing more than skeletons of their former selves, choked by rubble and desolation. The people who had survived had turned inward, fighting not just for survival, but for a reason to keep fighting at all. Ethan wasn't sure what kept him going anymore. Perhaps it was the faint echo of a memory, of a time when the sun had shone brightly, and life had seemed worth living. Perhaps it was the ragged survivors who still clung to a semblance of hope, like him. It had been months since the invasion had ended, and yet humanity remained trapped in a cycle of survival, scavenging for whatever scraps they could find. Today, like every other day, Ethan was on another supply run. The team had been scouring the abandoned city outskirts, searching for any useful food, water, or medical supplies. The air was thick with dust, a faint burning scent hanging in the wind, the remnants of fires long extinguished. The sky, once a clear blue, now seemed perpetually overcast, as though the heavens themselves had grown weary of the world below. He scanned the area as they moved cautiously down the empty street. His team was small, just 5 people, including himself. They were spread out, moving silently, listening for any sign of danger. The aliens had largely withdrawn, but there were still pockets of them scattered across Earth, scavengers and remnants of their forces that hadn't fully retreated. And of course, there were always the other humans, those who had given up on survival and turned into something worse, something unrecognizable. "Stay sharp," Ethan whispered to his team as they approached an old diner up ahead. The sign was half fallen, barely hanging on by a rusted nail, but the smell coming from inside caught his attention. A faint scent of something almost familiar. It was strange, because it had been so long since any food had remained fresh. "Anything?" Ethan asked, turning to Lara, one of the younger members of the group. She was quick, always alert, her eyes scanning every corner as she moved with purpose. She shook her head, her face grim. "No sign of movement, but there's something off about it," Lara replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan knew exactly what she meant. There was an eerie stillness around the place, as though it were waiting for something. They had learned long ago not to trust appearances. Many of the survivors they encountered had been changed, some mentally, others physically, by the strain of living in a broken world. Some had become desperate, doing anything to survive, while others had succumbed to something darker, more primal. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if this diner would be another trap, another hollow hope that would end in despair. "Let's check it out," Ethan said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling in his mind. "Lara, take the rear. James, you and Sarah cover the front." His team nodded, moving into position. Ethan pushed open the door of the diner, the hinges creaking loudly in the otherwise silent air. The inside was dimly lit by the faint glow of a few weak emergency lights that flickered from the ceiling. It was a mess, tables overturned, broken glass scattered across the floor. But the smell was unmistakable. It was food. Not the type of food they were used to, canned rations, stale bread, and water, but something fresh. Something that had not been touched by the ravages of time. At first, he thought he might be imagining it. His body had become so accustomed to the bitter, metallic taste of rationed food that anything else seemed like a luxury from another life. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw it. A group of survivors, sitting huddled in the far corner of the diner. They were gaunt, their faces hollowed out by hunger and despair, but there was a strange intensity in their eyes. "Who are you?" Ethan called, his voice steady but cautious. He didn't trust anyone these days. Trust had become a luxury, and in this world, luxury was a dangerous thing to cling to. The survivors looked up slowly, and for a moment, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something about their eyes, something empty yet intensely focused. It was as though they had been waiting for him, for someone, anyone. There was no surprise in their gaze, no fear, just hunger. One of them, a woman with long, unkempt hair, stood slowly, her movements deliberate, almost graceful. She took a step forward, and Ethan instinctively raised his weapon, his fingers tightening around the cold metal of his rifle. "Are you alone?" the woman whispered, her voice soft but sharp like a blade hidden in velvet. Ethan glanced back at his team, giving them a silent signal to remain on alert. "We're just looking for food and supplies," he said, trying to maintain a semblance of control over the situation. "You've got any food left?" The woman's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "No food left," she said, her voice almost soothing. "Just us." For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. It wasn't the words, but the way she said them. There was an odd stillness in her gaze, a sense of something that wasn't quite right. As she spoke, he noticed the others behind her, sitting motionless, their faces blank, their eyes staring into nothingness, yet their attention was fixed entirely on him. And then he saw it. In their eyes, it wasn't hunger for food, it was something far more disturbing. A deep, unsettling need, like something ancient and primal had awakened within them. It wasn't a thirst for water or a craving for a meal. No, this was something darker, something far more terrifying. Ethan felt a shiver run through his body. The realization hit him like a jolt of ice-cold water. They weren't starving, they were feeding. And whatever it was they were feeding on, Ethan feared it wasn't food. It was something else, something he couldn't comprehend. Yet he knew, deep down, that this encounter would change everything. The woman took another step forward, closing the distance between them. Her eyes never wavered from his, the faint glimmer of a strange hunger in them growing stronger. "You'll understand soon enough," she said, her voice almost a purr. "You're just like us, all of us are." Ethan's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't speak. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about survival. It was something much more insidious. With a glance at his team, he silently gestured for them to retreat. They hadn't come this far just to walk into a trap. But as Ethan turned to leave, the woman's voice followed him. "You'll be back," she whispered, the words lingering in the air like a haunting promise. The air felt heavy as Ethan and his team retreated from the diner, their minds racing with thoughts of what they had just encountered. The silence that followed their exit was oppressive, each footstep echoing in the emptiness of the ruined city. As they walked back toward their hidden camp, Ethan couldn't shake the image of the woman's eyes, the way they had looked at him, as if they saw something deeper than just a hungry, desperate human. Lara, walking beside him, broke the silence. "What do you think they were?" she asked, her voice low, barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at her, trying to process what had happened. "I'm not sure," he replied, his thoughts racing. "But they weren't just hungry for food." He paused. "It was something else." "Something off?" Lara nodded, looking back at the rest of the team, who were quietly following behind. James, Sarah, and the others moved with a tense caution, all of them affected by the strange encounter. The sudden shift in atmosphere seemed to hang over them, casting a shadow on their already grim reality. As they made their way back through the rubble-strewn streets, Ethan couldn't help but feel like they were being watched. The city, once bustling with life, now felt like an empty shell, and yet something in the silence suggested that they weren't truly alone. The idea that they had left something behind, something dangerous, nagged at the back of his mind. When they reached the camp, a small underground bunker hidden beneath the remains of a collapsed building, Ethan felt a slight sense of relief. The concrete walls of the camp, while grim and cold, offered a sense of security that the outside world no longer did. Inside, there were no eerie whispers, no hungry eyes, just the hum of the camp's few remaining generators. The team settled into their usual routine, but the atmosphere was different. The usual camaraderie had faded, replaced by a quiet unease. No one spoke much, but their eyes met occasionally, and Ethan could tell they were all thinking the same thing. The survivors they had encountered in the diner weren't like any humans they had met before. They were too still, too vacant. It was as if they were not quite themselves. Later that evening, as the team gathered around a small fire to eat the few rations they had left, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the woman's words. "You're just like us." What did she mean by that? Was she referring to the strange hunger in their eyes? Had they been transformed into something else? Ethan couldn't help but remember her smile, the one that never reached her eyes. It was cold, calculating. She had seemed to know something he didn't, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "Do you think we're safe here?" Lara's voice cut through his thoughts. She was sitting across from him, her face lit by the flickering firelight. Her eyes searched his face, waiting for an answer. Ethan looked at her, his mind still racing. "I don't know," he said honestly. But I don't think we should go back to that diner, not unless we have no other choice. Lara nodded, but there was a hint of doubt in her expression. I don't trust them. They felt wrong. Ethan sighed and rubbed his temples. Yeah, they did. He leaned back against the concrete wall, staring up at the dim light overhead. But we're running out of food, and we can't afford to be picky. We'll be okay, Lara said quietly. We always have been. But even as she said the words, Ethan could hear the uncertainty in her voice. They had been surviving on scraps for so long that the idea of finding something more felt like a distant dream. But the thought of going back to the diner, of encountering those strange survivors again, gnawed at him. He knew it wasn't just hunger they were dealing with. Something darker was at play here, something that went beyond mere survival. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Ethan lay wide awake in his corner of the camp, listening to the faint sounds of his team's restless movements. He could hear Lara's quiet breathing, James shifting in his sleep, and Sarah's muffled cough. The camp was alive with the sounds of exhaustion, but also the deep, underlying fear that seemed to be creeping into their bones. When the morning light finally filtered into the camp, Ethan knew he couldn't ignore the problem any longer. The diner, the survivors. The strange feeling of being watched, it was all connected, and it was only a matter of time before whatever was out there would come for them. But he couldn't figure out what it was. Not yet. After breakfast, he called the team together. They sat in a loose circle around the campfire, their faces tense and drawn. It was clear that the events of the previous day had unsettled them all. We need to make a decision, Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. We can't keep running on empty, and we can't ignore the diner either. Something's going on there, and we need to find out what. Lara spoke first. You're not thinking of going back there, are you? Ethan met her gaze. We don't have much of a choice, Lara. If they have food, we need it. But they're not like us, she protested, her voice rising. Those people, those survivors, they're different. They're not just hungry, they've changed. I don't think we should trust them. Ethan paused, considering her words. He understood her fear, but the reality was harsh. They couldn't survive on air, and the threat of starvation was far more immediate than whatever strange force had turned those survivors into what they were. I'm not saying we trust them, he said slowly. But we need to find out what's really going on, and if we have to fight, we fight. The team exchanged uneasy glances, but eventually they all nodded in agreement. They had no other choice. They would have to return to the diner, confront whatever was waiting there, and hope that they could survive it. As they gathered their supplies and prepared to leave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The survivors had seemed so calm, so composed, yet their eyes had told a different story. What had they been through? And what were they hiding? Ethan didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing: whatever this was, it wasn't over. And they wouldn't be able to ignore it for much longer. And Ethan knew without a doubt that she was right. The team moved out early the next morning, the sun barely rising above the horizon, casting a pale glow over the ruined landscape. The air felt thick, weighed down by the burden of what lay ahead. Ethan tried to keep his focus, but his mind kept wandering back to the diner and the strange survivors they had encountered. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was resisting their journey. The streets were silent, the occasional gust of wind kicking up the dust that seemed to cover everything. It was almost as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ethan scanned the area around them, his eyes darting from one building to the next, always alert for any sign of danger. They had been down this road before, scavenging for supplies, hoping to find something useful, but the uneasy feeling in his gut told him this time would be different. We're getting close, Lara said, her voice breaking the silence. She was walking beside him, her eyes scanning the streets ahead. The rest of the team was spread out behind them, keeping watch as they moved. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he focused on the diner in the distance, just visible through the haze of dust. The building stood like a decaying monument to a time long past, its walls cracked and weathered by years of neglect. But it was still standing, still offering the promise of something they desperately needed. As they neared the diner, Ethan felt the weight of the decision he had made pressing down on him. Was it the right choice? Should they have turned back and tried to find another way to survive? The thought of facing the survivors again filled him with dread, but he knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. We stick together, he said, his voice firm. No one moves ahead alone. Lara nodded, her expression grim. I know, Ethan, I'm not sure about this. Ethan didn't answer, but he understood. No one was sure, not anymore. They had all seen too much, felt too much of the world slipping away from them to believe in the old certainties. Hope had become a fragile thing, something that could shatter in an instant. When they reached the diner, the door stood slightly ajar as though it had been waiting for them. The smell of food, real food, wafted out, making Ethan's stomach tighten with hunger, but he forced himself to ignore it. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about answers. He motioned for the team to spread out, and they moved cautiously toward the entrance. As Ethan stepped over the threshold, he immediately felt the temperature drop, the air growing thick and heavy. The diner looked the same as it had the day before, empty, abandoned, and eerily silent. But something was different this time. The survivors were there, just as he had expected, but there was no sign of the warm welcome he had anticipated. They didn't greet him with open arms. Instead, they watched him, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light like something not quite human. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as the woman from before, the one who had spoken to him, slowly stood from her seat. She didn't smile this time. Her expression was unreadable, as though she were waiting for him to make the first move. "You came back," she said softly, her voice still smooth, almost melodic. Ethan nodded, keeping his distance. "We need food." The woman's lips twitched, but she didn't respond right away. Instead, she glanced at the others, her gaze lingering on each of them for a moment, as though assessing them. Ethan's team stood in the doorway, uneasy but unwilling to retreat. "We don't have what you're looking for," the woman finally said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Not in the way you think." Ethan's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Then what do you have?" The woman's smile was faint but knowing. "We have what you need," she replied, "but it comes at a price." Ethan exchanged a quick look with Lara, who was still standing at his side, her face tense. "What kind of price?" he asked cautiously. "The kind that changes everything," the woman said, her eyes flickering with something that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "The kind that makes you question who you are and what you believe." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had hoped for answers, but this wasn't what he had expected. He had come here to find food, to find something tangible, something that would keep them alive for just a little longer. But now it felt like they were standing at the edge of something far darker than they had ever imagined. The woman took a step closer to him, her movements slow and deliberate. Ethan instinctively stepped back, but the woman's eyes locked onto his, holding him in place. "You came to us for a reason," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You need us. You're just like us now, whether you know it or not." Ethan's heart raced as her words sank in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, filled with suspicion. The woman smiled, a cold, calculated smile that made Ethan's skin crawl. "You think you're still human," she said, her tone almost pitying. "But you're not anymore." Ethan's mind spun as he tried to make sense of her words. What was she saying? What was she implying? He glanced back at his team, who were still standing near the doorway, clearly unsure of what to do next. Lara stepped forward, her voice sharp. "We're not like you. We're not some, whatever you are." The woman's gaze flickered to Lara, and for a moment Ethan could see a glimmer of something in her eyes, something almost hungry. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold smile. "You will be," she said simply. "Eventually." Ethan's blood ran cold at her words. He didn't know what kind of transformation the woman was talking about, but he didn't like it, not one bit. "We're leaving," Ethan said, his voice firm. He didn't care if they had food or not. He didn't care if they had answers. There was something about this place, about these people, that made his skin crawl. It was wrong, and he wasn't going to risk it. But as he turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped him. "You'll be back," she said, her tone almost soothing. "You'll come to understand soon enough." Ethan didn't respond. He motioned for his team to follow him, and they quickly made their way out of the diner, the woman's words echoing in their ears. He didn't know what kind of game she was playing, but he was certain of one thing. They had only just scratched the surface of whatever was going on here. And whatever it was only getting darker. The journey back to camp was quieter than before. The diner's unsettling atmosphere lingered in Ethan's mind like a shadow that wouldn't fade. He kept his pace steady, but his thoughts were racing. The woman's words haunted him. "You'll be back. You'll come to understand soon enough." What did she mean? And why did it feel like they had barely scratched the surface of something far more dangerous? Lara walked beside him, her face pale, her eyes darting nervously as she glanced back at the diner in the distance. She hadn't said much since they left, but Ethan knew she was just as disturbed as he was. They both knew something wasn't right, but neither could explain it. As they reached the camp, Ethan felt a deep sense of relief wash over him. The familiar sight of the bunker, nestled among the ruins, was a small comfort in a world that had been stripped of safety. The cold concrete walls, though oppressive, were a far cry from the eerie, suffocating presence of the diner. Inside, at least they knew what to expect. Outside, there were only questions. The team settled into their usual spots in the camp. James and Sarah immediately began preparing the small ration packs they had left, while the others checked their weapons and tended to the camp's few remaining supplies. But the usual routine felt hollow, like everyone was simply going through the motions. No one seemed eager to speak. Ethan stood near the entrance of the camp, staring into the distance, trying to make sense of everything. The woman, the survivors, what did they want from them? Were they truly human? Ethan's gut told him they weren't, but he couldn't explain why. There was something unnatural about them, something that made his skin crawl. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Lara standing there, her arms crossed. She looked troubled, but her gaze was steady. "What now, Ethan?" she asked, her voice low but firm. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but I can't shake the feeling that we've missed something important." Lara raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "The diner, those people, they weren't just hungry, they were different." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think whatever's going on there, it's more than just survival. They're hiding something, and I'm not sure we're ready to face it." Lara nodded slowly. "I felt it too. It wasn't just the food. It was how they looked at us, like they already knew what we needed, like we were part of their plan." Ethan looked down at his feet, feeling the weight of her words. "Exactly, and now I'm wondering if we're already too deep in. What if we're part of something we don't even understand yet?" Lara stayed silent for a moment, then stepped closer. "We have to keep moving forward, Ethan. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. But we can't turn back now. We've survived this long because we keep pushing forward. We can't stop now." Her words struck a chord in Ethan. He knew she was right. They had no choice but to keep going. But something about the whole situation felt like a trap, one that was closing in around them, and Ethan wasn't sure how to escape. The next few days passed in a blur of unease. They went out on supply runs, searching for whatever scraps they could find, but nothing seemed normal anymore. The survivors they had met at the diner were never far from Ethan's thoughts. He knew they were still out there, waiting. But for what? Lara had been keeping a close eye on the rest of the team, noticing subtle changes in their behavior. James, usually the most reliable of the group, had become distant, his eyes unfocused. Sarah seemed to be losing weight at an alarming rate, and her energy was fading. The rest of the team, though still functioning, moved with less purpose, as if the weight of what they had experienced was starting to take its toll. One evening, after they had finished their rationed meals and settled down for the night, Ethan decided he couldn't ignore the situation any longer. Something was wrong. It was time to confront the truth. He gathered the team around the fire. The campfire crackled as they all settled down, the flickering light casting long shadows across their faces. He could see the weariness in their eyes, the unease that lingered even after a full day's work. "I don't know how to say this," Ethan began, his voice steady but filled with urgency, "but I think we've been infected by something. Not physically, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Whatever is happening with the survivors at the diner, it's spreading. It's affecting us." The team exchanged confused glances, clearly unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean, affecting us?" Lara asked, her voice sharp. She had noticed the changes too, but hearing Ethan say it out loud made it all feel even more real. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. "I'm not sure how to explain it, but I can feel it, like something's pulling at us, drawing us into whatever the survivors are. Their eyes, the way they spoke, it's like they were trying to make us see things their way." And now, he looked around at his team. "Now we're all different. Look at James, Sarah, you all feel it too, don't you?" The team fell silent as they turned their gaze to James and Sarah. James, sitting on a log near the fire, was staring at his hands, his fingers twitching as if he couldn't control them. Sarah was slumped over, her face pale, her once bright eyes now dull and distant. Ethan's heart tightened as he watched her, realizing just how much the camp had changed in the past few days. "It's spreading," Ethan muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Whatever it is, it's got its hooks in us." Lara looked back at the diner in the distance, her expression troubled. Then we need to do something about it. We can't just sit here and wait for whatever's happening to us to take over. Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of urgency growing inside him. I agree. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're up against. If we're not careful, we'll end up just like them. For the rest of the night, the team sat in uneasy silence, the weight of Ethan's words settling over them. They had no clear plan, no idea how to fight back against something they didn't fully understand. But they knew one thing: if they didn't do something soon, they would lose themselves entirely. The next morning, they decided to make one final push to uncover the truth. They would return to the diner, face whatever was waiting for them, and try to break free from whatever influence had taken hold of them. As they prepared to leave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far worse than they had imagined. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and the answers they sought were just beyond their reach. The day had barely begun, but already the atmosphere in the camp felt heavier than ever. Ethan stood at the entrance, staring into the distance, as if trying to see beyond the ruins. His mind was racing with thoughts of the survivors at the diner, the strange influence they had over him and his team, and the growing sense of dread that had settled in his chest. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made. They would return to the diner, face whatever was waiting there, and try to break free from whatever grip it had on them. He turned back to see Lara preparing their gear. She moved with a quiet determination, though he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. The rest of the team was already ready, their expressions matching the gravity of the situation. They were all walking into the unknown, but none of them had any illusions about the danger they faced. The diner, the survivors, whatever it was, they were connected to the strange changes taking place within the group. It was time to find out why. As they set out toward the diner, the once familiar surroundings now felt alien. The streets, once the path of survival, had become a desolate wasteland. The wind carried the faint scent of decay, and the air felt thicker than usual. It was as if the world itself had become a part of whatever darkness was creeping through the survivors. It was no longer just about food or supplies. It was about understanding the force that had begun to infect them all, and it was pulling them back to that diner like a magnet. When they reached the diner, nothing had changed. The building still stood like a silent monument to something forgotten. The door, still slightly ajar, seemed to beckon them inside. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, leading the team into the diner, with Lara right behind him and the rest of the group following closely. Inside, the air was thick with an unsettling quiet. The survivors were there, just as they had been before, sitting in their usual places. But now there was no question in Ethan's mind that something was wrong. They weren't just waiting for them. They were watching them, observing every movement as if studying them. The woman who had spoken to Ethan before stood from her seat, her movements fluid, almost predatory. She looked at them with those eyes, those cold, knowing eyes, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that held a secret, a truth they weren't yet ready to hear. "You came back," she said, her voice soft and melodic, yet carrying an undercurrent of something far more sinister. Ethan swallowed, trying to steady his breathing. "We need answers," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "What is happening here? What's happening to us?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as though considering his question. Then she took a step toward him, her gaze never leaving his. "You already know," she said quietly. "You feel it, don't you? The change, the hunger, it's all part of what's happening to you, to all of you." Ethan's heart raced. He could feel it, he couldn't deny it any longer. The strange sense of hunger, not for food, but for something deeper, something more primal. It was growing inside him, just as it had grown inside the others. He looked at Lara, James, Sarah. All of them had changed in small ways over the past few days. It wasn't just physical. It was something inside them pulling at their very essence. Lara spoke then, her voice trembling but filled with a mix of anger and fear. "What have you done to us? What is this thing you're a part of?" The woman smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "We haven't done anything. You've done it to yourselves. You've come to us because you need what we have, and now you're becoming one of us." Ethan's head spun. He couldn't understand. "No," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "We didn't come here to be like you. We came for food, for supplies. We came to survive." The woman's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "Survival is a choice," she said softly, "but survival, true survival, means becoming something greater." You think you're fighting for your lives, but you're just delaying the inevitable. The change is already inside you. It's already begun. Ethan shook his head, trying to push back the rising panic. We're not like you, we're human. The woman's smile widened, her expression turning almost pitying. You were human, but now you're something else, just like us, just like the others who have come before you. Ethan felt his knees weaken. He glanced at his team. They all looked as though they were listening, processing what the woman was saying, but something was wrong. Their eyes, there was a faint glow in them just like hers. They were slipping away from him, drawn into her words, her presence. Ethan realized with a sinking feeling that the change wasn't just physical, it was mental. They were becoming part of something else, something he didn't fully understand. You can't fight it, the woman continued, her voice smooth, coaxing. You'll want to. You'll fight it for as long as you can, but in the end you'll see, you'll understand. This is the way the world is now. We are the new order, and you, all of you, will be part of it. The words echoed in Ethan's mind, but he couldn't bring himself to believe them. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let it end like this. He had to fight. They all had to fight. Lara stepped forward, her face twisted with fear and defiance. No, she said, her voice trembling but strong. We will fight. We won't become like you. We won't give in to whatever this is. The woman's smile faltered for the briefest moment, then returned, colder than before. You'll see, she said softly. It's already too late. The change has begun. Ethan felt the pull, the pressure inside him, and he knew she was right. Something had shifted. It wasn't just a physical hunger. It was something deeper, something that had been inside them from the moment they stepped into the diner. They were already part of it, already starting to change. But that didn't mean they had to give in. Not yet. We don't have to be like you, Ethan said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. We can still fight. We can still take back control. The woman's eyes flashed with something darker, something almost predatory. We'll see how long you can fight it. Ethan turned to his team, his gaze sweeping over each of them. They were shaking, but they were still there, still human. They had to be, they couldn't give up, not now. Gather your strength, he said quietly. We're not done yet. But deep down, a part of him knew the battle had only just begun. And the true fight would be against the change itself, against whatever this thing was that had started to creep into their bones. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about holding on to what made them human in the face of something that sought to strip that away. As they turned to leave, the woman's voice called after them. You'll be back, she said softly, almost as if it were a promise. Just like the others. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to, he knew the truth. They had to fight, they had to survive for as long as they could.